Meet Linda Anderson, a 65-year-old widow living in a quiet suburb near Portland, Oregon. For more than 4 decades, Linda poured her strength into raising her 2 sons, caring for her late husband, and protecting the home that became her sanctuary. In the autumn of her life, she imagined peace, garden walks, and evenings spent reading on the porch. Yet life brought her something very different. A mystery inside her own family that would test her courage, her dignity, and her will to stand firm. Linda's story is not only about one woman's resilience, it reflects the silent struggles of countless older adults who fight every day for respect, independence, and the simple right to live freely. This is the heart of Grandma's Final Chapter, a channel dedicated to powerful storytelling that honors the wisdom of older generations. Every episode is crafted with care to bring you moving tales of betrayal, healing, and rebirth stories that remind us that aging is not the end, but a chance to choose ourselves again. If you believe seniors deserve happiness and self-determination, join our community today. Subscribe, press the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Together, we can make sure voices like Linda's are heard, celebrated, and never forgotten. The morning began like so many others in the quiet suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. A soft drizzle had left the streets damp, the air heavy with the smell of wet cedar and earth. Linda Anderson, 65 and widowed for nearly a decade, moved through her kitchen with a familiar rhythm. She had already washed the breakfast dishes, wiped down the counter, and folded the dish towel neatly on the oven handle. The silence of the house felt almost too still, broken only by the faint sound of water running upstairs. Her daughter-in-law, Emma, had gone up moments earlier, her voice floating down the stairs with a gentle laugh as she announced she would take a quick shower before heading to the market. Linda smiled when she heard it. She had always thought Emma carried herself with a kind of grace, the sort of calm charm that made her son Stephen proud to call her his wife. It gave Linda comfort to know that Stephen, always so busy with architectural projects, had a partner who kept their home warm and their little boy Matthew loved and safe. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until the phone rang. She dried her hands on her apron and reached for the old landline. The cheerful voice on the other end lifted her heart instantly. It was Mark, her youngest, the boy who had once played with model planes in the backyard and who now flew real ones across the world. "Hi, Mom," he said brightly. "I had a few minutes before takeoff, thought I'd call." They talked briefly, his voice carrying that familiar mix of boyish enthusiasm and professional calm. Linda asked him about his flights, his layovers, whether he was eating properly. Mark chuckled, giving her easy reassurances. But then, in the space of a breath, his tone shifted. A hesitation crept in. "Mom," he said, quieter now, "I need to ask you something strange. Is Emma at the house right now?" Linda frowned, glancing instinctively toward the stairs. The water was still running. She could almost picture Emma humming softly behind the closed bathroom door. "Of course," she said, almost puzzled by the question. "She's upstairs, taking a shower. I just spoke to her." The pause on the line was long, so long Linda thought perhaps the call had dropped. Then Mark's voice returned, but it was no longer casual. It was low, heavy, urgent. "Mom, that's impossible. I have Emma's passport right here in my hand. She just boarded my flight to London. I saw her walk down the jet bridge. She is sitting on this plane right now as I'm speaking to you." Linda's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the receiver tighter, her knuckles turning white. The room around her seemed to tilt ever so slightly. She laughed, though her voice cracked. "Mark, you must be mistaken. Maybe you saw someone who looks like her. Emma is here. I heard her voice not 10 minutes ago." But Mark did not laugh with her. His breathing on the other end was steady but tense, like a man watching something unfold that he could not believe himself. "I'm not wrong, Mom," he whispered. "I checked the passport. It's hers. The picture, the name, everything. And I'm looking at her right now. She is sitting in first class talking to a man. They look very close." Linda's chest tightened, as if invisible hands were pressing against her ribs. She opened her mouth to protest, to dismiss it all as a mistake, but before she could form the words, a sound froze her blood. The shower upstairs shut off. Moments later, footsteps descended the hall, light but unmistakable. Then came Emma's voice, clear and casual, drifting down the stairs. "Mom, who's on the phone?" Linda's world split in two. In her hand, her son's voice swore he was staring at Emma across the aisle of an airplane bound for London. In her home, that same Emma was calling down to her, hair dripping, skin flushed from hot water. Two realities collided with such force that Linda felt as if the floor beneath her feet might give way. She turned her face toward the living room, forcing her lips into a trembling smile as Emma peeked around the corner, a towel draped over her shoulders. "Oh, just a friend of mine," Linda muttered quickly into the receiver, her voice shaking. She pressed the phone tighter to her ear, moving toward the far wall to put space between herself and the figure upstairs. "Mark," she whispered. "I just heard her. She's here. Right here." On the other end of the line, Mark's reply came like a knife. "Mom, listen to me. I am looking directly at her. I can't explain it, but she is on this plane." Linda's pulse raced. Her mind whirled with questions that had no answers. How could Emma be in two places at once? Who was the woman upstairs if not the daughter-in-law she thought she knew? And what truth was hiding behind this impossible moment? Her knees weakened, and she sank slowly into the nearest chair, the phone trembling against her ear. For the first time in years, Linda felt genuine fear within the walls of her own home. She had lost her husband, survived loneliness, and built her life around protecting her family. But this was something else, something darker. The kind of fear that came not from the outside world, but from within the place you thought was safest. Linda closed her eyes, clinging to the sound of Mark's breathing through the line. She wanted to believe this was all some cruel mistake, but deep down, she knew it was only the beginning of a story that would shatter the fragile piece she had been holding together. And to you who are listening now, let me ask, have you ever experienced a moment so sudden, so strange, that it felt like your heart dropped into a bottomless pit? If you have, share it with me in the comments. Your stories matter, your voice matters, and perhaps, together, we can make sense of the unexplainable. The day after that unsettling call, Linda found herself walking through the familiar rooms of her house as if seeing them for the first time. Every photograph on the wall seemed to carry a weight she had never noticed before. There was David on his wedding day, standing tall in a gray suit with Emma beside him, radiant in her ivory gown. The backyard had been strung with fairy lights, the grass trimmed short, the scent of roses heavy in the summer air. Linda remembered watching them sway gently in their first dance while neighbors clapped along. She had thought, with tears stinging her eyes, that her son had found his perfect partner. David was the steady one. An architect who buried himself in blueprints and late-night deadlines, he was devoted but often too tired to notice the small details at home. He adored Emma. He spoke of her as if she were the quiet engine of his life, the woman who made the house not only livable but alive. For Linda, that was enough. A man consumed by his work needed a wife who could anchor him, and Emma seemed to do exactly that. Then there was Mark, her youngest. The boy who had begged for toy airplanes every Christmas, who built models with glue-stained fingers at the kitchen table. He had grown into a pilot who crossed oceans while Linda stood on the porch watching the skies, comforted by the thought that he was somewhere above them, safe in his element. Mark had never settled down, never found the right woman, but he carried an earnest warmth that made Linda proud. When he called, she heard the child in him as much as the man, and that connection was her lifeline. But the brightest star in Linda's life was Ethan, her 7-year-old grandson. His laughter echoed in the halls like a song, his small hands tugging at her sleeve, his eager voice begging for another story at bedtime. Ethan carried innocence in his smile, a light that made even the darkest days bearable. Linda often thought of him as the reward for all the years of sacrifice, all the nights she had stayed up with a sick child, all the struggles of widowhood. Watching him run across the yard chasing butterflies, she believed that her family's future was secure. Emma had been central to this vision. From the very beginning, she had seemed like the daughter Linda never had. At the wedding, Emma's parents had set long tables under white tents in their garden. The food was simple but abundant, the laughter contagious. Emma's bright eyes and confident smile lit the evening, and Linda had whispered to herself that she was lucky. Lucky to gain not only a daughter-in-law, but a partner who would help raise Ethan with tenderness and devotion. In the years since, Emma had played the part flawlessly. She was the mother who packed Ethan's school lunches with care, the wife who reminded David not to miss parent-teacher conferences, the daughter-in-law who brought Linda tea when her joints ached on rainy days. She kept her hair neat, her clothes tasteful, her manners impeccable. To neighbors, she was the picture of patience, always greeting them with a warm word or an extra slice of pie. To the outside world, the Andersons looked like a family touched by grace. And yet, behind this portrait of harmony, Linda now felt the crack widening. Mark's voice from the night before haunted her. He had seen Emma on his plane. He had held her passport in his hands. The memory of that call clashed violently with the image of the young woman who had stepped out of the shower upstairs, her hair wet, her smile gentle. How could both versions be true? Linda replayed her memories with a new suspicion. She recalled the way Emma's smile sometimes seemed too quick, almost rehearsed. She thought of the times Emma returned from errands looking tired, distracted, her explanations vague. These had been brushed aside as the ordinary moods of a busy mother, but now they seemed like clues she had failed to notice. The photographs on the wall glared back at her. There was Ethan in his kindergarten portrait, front teeth missing, eyes shining. There was David and Emma holding him as a newborn, exhaustion and joy written across their faces. There was Mark in his pilot's uniform, standing proudly by the plane that symbolized his childhood dream come true. These images told the story of a family whole and happy, a family Linda had given her heart to. Yet in the pit of her stomach, she felt that story beginning to unravel. The hardest part was the conflict inside her. She wanted to trust her eyes, to cling to the daughter-in-law who had cared for Ethan with such tenderness. But Mark's certainty was undeniable. He was not a man who mistook faces, not a son who would fabricate something so serious. Linda sat in her favorite armchair that evening, Ethan curled against her side with a picture book. His little voice stumbled over the words, his finger pointing to the drawings of animals. She kissed his head and forced a smile, but her mind was far away. Every word he read seemed to echo against the hollow ache in her chest. How do you protect a child from a truth you cannot yet explain? She looked around the room, at the cozy lamp glow, the neatly arranged cushions, the family photographs smiling down from the walls. On the surface, everything remained the same, and yet she could feel the foundation shifting beneath her feet. The Andersons looked like a family complete, the kind of family neighbors admired and friends envied. But Linda knew now that perfection was only an illusion, and illusions have a way of shattering. The days that followed should have been ordinary, but for Linda Anderson nothing felt normal anymore. Once the seed of doubt had been planted, every small detail became a clue, every moment a test. She began watching Emma more closely than she ever had, though she tried to mask her attention with a grandmother's gentle smile. The first sign came at the kitchen table one Tuesday morning. Emma was helping Ethan with his spelling words, her hand moving neatly across the page. Linda stood at the sink pretending to rinse dishes, but her eyes caught on the pen in Emma's hand. She was writing with her right hand, her strokes elegant and steady. That much was expected. Emma had always been right-handed. Yet the very next afternoon, Linda walked into the dining room to find Emma scribbling a grocery list with her left hand. The letters were crooked, the ink pressed too hard into the paper, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone unused to holding a pen that way. Linda remembered the moment too vividly. She asked lightly, "Since when do you write with your left hand, dear?" Emma had given a quick laugh, brushing it off. "Oh, I just like to practice sometimes. Keeps the brain sharp." The answer had been smooth, but the look in her eyes had not. For the first time, Linda felt that Emma was not simply hiding fatigue or stress. She was hiding something else entirely. It was not only the handwriting. Emma's moods began to swing like a pendulum. One evening she returned from the market carrying fresh flowers and greeted Linda with a hug so warm it made her eyes sting. She hummed as she chopped vegetables, kissed Ethan on the forehead, and reminded David to wear his jacket because the night air was cool. She seemed to radiate kindness, but the very next day, she snapped at Ethan for spilling a drop of juice, her eyes cold, her tone sharp. David frowned, asking her gently to calm down, but Emma only muttered that she was tired and left the room. Linda's heart tightened as she watched Ethan shrink under his mother's sudden anger. A child's confusion was the cruelest evidence. The boy clung to Linda afterward, whispering, "Grandma, sometimes Mom is really nice, and other times she feels like someone else." His words pierced deeper than any suspicion could. Out of the mouths of children comes the truth adults are too afraid to speak. The neighbors began to notice as well. Mrs. Kelly, who lived next door and often stopped by for tea, mentioned casually that Emma had seemed distracted lately. "She came by yesterday to return my pie dish. She smiled and chatted for 20 minutes about the weather. But this morning, I waved from my porch and she acted like she didn't even know me. It was odd." Linda forced a laugh in response, but her stomach twisted. At David's favorite bakery, the owner, Mr. Howard, greeted Linda with his usual warmth. As he wrapped her loaf of bread, he said, "Your daughter-in-law came in 2 days ago, full of compliments about the croissants. But today she stopped by again and barely spoke a word. Bought the same bread, paid without looking at me, and left. I thought maybe she was having a rough day." Linda thanked him quietly, but her heart sank. Even at the farmer's market, where Emma was known for cheerful greetings, people began to whisper. One vendor told Linda, "Your daughter-in-law is so kind. Just last week she laughed with me about the price of tomatoes. But today, she bought her vegetables in silence. It was like she wasn't the same person." Alone in her living room, Linda felt the weight of all these small testimonies pressing down on her. They were no longer isolated oddities. They were patterns, too sharp to ignore. Her mind, still haunted by Mark's voice on the phone, began to stitch these fragments together into something darker. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Linda opened the drawer of a side table and pulled out a notebook that had belonged to her late husband. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. She placed it on the dining room table, lit the lamp, and began to write. Her first entry was simple. Emma left for the market at 3 o'clock, returned at 6, said she met a friend, mood sour, used left hand to unpack groceries. The next day she wrote again, helped Ethan with homework, writing neat, right-handed, sang him to sleep, gentle mood. And again, snapped at Ethan over spilled juice. Eyes cold, did not sing him to bed, used left hand to stir soup. Each line felt like a small betrayal recorded in ink. Yet writing them gave Linda strength. It turned confusion into something tangible, something she could hold up against the doubts clawing at her mind. The act of documenting gave her a fragile sense of control. The more she wrote, the clearer the picture became. Emma's inconsistencies were no longer fleeting impressions in Linda's mind. They were facts, recorded day after day. The notebook grew heavy with detail, every page carrying the weight of suspicion. Linda would sit at the table late at night, the ticking clock echoing in the stillness, her pen scratching across the paper. Sometimes she trembled so much that her handwriting faltered, but she forced herself to continue. She owed it to David, to Ethan, to the memory of her late husband who had taught her that truth, however painful, was better than illusion. By the end of that week, Linda closed the notebook and laid her hand across its cover. The evidence was there, undeniable. Emma was not simply tired, not simply moody. Something was terribly wrong. The neighbors had seen it, her grandson had felt it, and now Linda had written proof. She sat back in her chair, staring into the shadows that pooled in the corners of the room. Her heart pounded as the truth pressed closer. The family she had thought unshakable was unraveling before her eyes. She whispered into the silence, not knowing if she was speaking to herself, to God, or to the memory of her husband. "This is no longer my imagination. This is real." And with those words, Linda knew she had crossed a line. There was no going back to blind trust. The mystery inside her home had become a living presence, and she was determined to face it, no matter what the truth would cost. It was a gray Wednesday afternoon when Linda noticed Ethan sitting quietly at the kitchen table, his notebook spread open before him. The boy usually hummed or chatted as he worked, his pencils rolling across the table, but today he seemed thoughtful, his little brow furrowed as he compared 2 pages of his schoolwork. Linda approached gently, wiping her hands on a towel. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" she asked, lowering herself into the chair beside him. Ethan turned the notebook toward her. On one page, the handwriting was elegant, letters rounded neatly, the kind of script Linda would have praised in her own classroom years ago. On the next page, the letters sprawled unevenly, pressed too hard into the paper, almost messy. "Grandma," Ethan said softly, "yesterday Mom helped me with my homework. She wrote these words with her right hand. Look, they're so pretty." His small finger traced the page with pride, then his hand moved to the next one. "But today she used her left hand, and it looks all wrong. I told her it didn't look the same, but she just said she was tired." Linda's throat tightened. She reached out to stroke his hair, but her fingers trembled. "Sometimes grown-ups get tired, darling," she murmured, though the explanation rang hollow even in her own ears. Ethan looked up at her with eyes too clear, too honest. "Grandma," he whispered, "sometimes I think I have 2 moms. One is nice. She hugs me tight and sings me songs at night. But the other one, she gets angry for no reason. She yells when I spill my juice. She doesn't smile the same. I don't like that, Mom." The words cut deeper than any accusation Linda could have written in her notebook. Out of the innocence of a 7-year-old came the truth no adult dared to voice. Tears welled in Linda's eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm. She gathered Ethan into her arms, holding him close as if she could shield him from the confusion swirling in their home. "Oh, my darling boy," she whispered into his hair, "you are not wrong. Sometimes children see things more clearly than we do." As she rocked him gently, her mind raced. Every suspicion she had harbored, every note in her leather-bound journal, now had the sharp confirmation of a child's voice. This was no longer about vague moods or quirks of personality. Ethan had named what Linda had feared to believe. There were 2 versions of Emma, and they were not the same. Later that evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Linda watched Emma with renewed intensity. She served the soup with her left hand, ladling carefully into each bowl. She smiled at David, reminding him about Ethan's school event next week, her tone warm and motherly. But when Ethan spilled a bit of broth on the tablecloth, her smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice grew cold. "Ethan, must you always be so clumsy?" The boy shrank back in his chair, his small shoulders trembling. Linda reached over and dabbed the spill with her napkin. "It's just a little soup, darling," she said, but her words were for both Ethan and herself. Her hand gripped the napkin so tightly that her knuckles burned. Ethan looked at her, then at his mother, and whispered so softly that only Linda could hear, "See, Grandma? Today, it's the mean mom." The rest of the meal passed in strained silence, the clinking of silverware louder than any conversation. Linda could hardly taste the food. Her mind replayed Ethan's words again and again. Children did not lie about things like this. They noticed the details adults ignored, and they spoke the truth with devastating simplicity. After dinner, when David had gone to his study and Emma busied herself in the kitchen, Ethan curled up next to Linda on the living room sofa. He rested his head on her lap, his voice drowsy but insistent. "Grandma, can you sing me that song you used to sing to Daddy and Uncle Mark?" Linda's voice caught, but she began softly, the old lullaby filling the quiet room. Ethan smiled sleepily. "Yesterday Mom sang it too, but today she didn't. She just told me to go to sleep." He yawned and drifted off, his little body finally relaxing. Linda smoothed his hair, her heart breaking. How could she protect him from something she barely understood herself? The evidence was piling up, not just in her notebook, but in the mouth of the child she loved most. That night, Linda sat alone at the dining room table. She opened her notebook and wrote in heavy strokes. Ethan confirmed differences: right hand, left hand, sweet mother, angry mother, child sees two versions. She paused, tears blurring the ink. She whispered aloud, "This is not imagination anymore. The truth is in his eyes." The lamplight flickered as if in agreement. Linda closed the notebook and pressed her palm against its cover, feeling the weight of the truth settle on her shoulders. She had no choice now but to keep digging, not only for her own peace of mind, but for Ethan's safety and innocence. And to those of you listening, I must ask from the heart, do you believe children often speak truths that adults overlook? If you do, please click the like button now. Let's spread that belief together so every child's voice can be valued. The notebook on the dining table had grown heavier with every page, but the weight inside Linda's chest was heavier still. She could no longer dismiss the doubts as imagination. Ethan's innocent words had pierced through her last defenses. The time had come to act. On a quiet Saturday morning, Linda found her chance. David had gone to the office for weekend overtime, and Ethan was at a class field trip with his school. The house was still, except for Emma's soft voice drifting from upstairs as she prepared to go out. "Mom, I'm heading to the market. Do you need anything?" Emma called, her tone warm, casual, as if no shadow lurked between them. Linda forced a smile. "Some tomatoes, dear. Thank you." Emma's footsteps descended the stairs. She wore a pale yellow dress with a wicker basket hooked over her arm. She looked every bit the devoted daughter-in-law heading to the farmer's market. But Linda's pulse quickened as she tied her shawl around her shoulders and waited until the gate clicked shut. She counted to 30 under her breath, then slipped out the door. The morning sun was sharp and sweat gathered at the back of her neck as she followed at a careful distance. Emma's pace was brisk, her skirt brushing against her knees as she walked. Linda kept to the opposite side of the street, hiding behind parked cars and garden hedges whenever Emma glanced over her shoulder. At first, the path seemed familiar. Emma headed toward the market as she always claimed. But just before the main square, she slowed and turned left into a narrow alley behind the industrial area. The houses here were older, pressed shoulder to shoulder with cracked paint and sagging roofs. The smell of oil and rust hung in the air. Linda's breath caught. This was not the way to the market. She pressed herself against the corner of a fence, peering out with her heart thudding so hard she feared it would give her away. Emma walked with purpose down the shadowed alley until she stopped in front of a house with the number 19 nailed crookedly above the door. The walls were stained, the window shutters peeling. She lifted her hand and knocked twice, quick and deliberate. The door opened just a sliver, then widened enough for Emma to slip inside. The door closed, leaving the street silent once more. Linda stood frozen. Her palms grew damp, her shawl clinging to her shoulders. Every instinct screamed to march up to the door, demand an explanation, drag her daughter-in-law out into the daylight. But her feet would not move. Fear rooted her in place. Fear of the truth. Fear of what she might see if she stepped inside. She turned away at last, her body trembling as she made her way back home. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her mind spun in frantic circles. Why would Emma go there? Who lived in that house? What secret could be hidden behind its faded walls? When Linda pushed open her gate, she half expected the house to be empty, to buy herself time to think. But as she stepped into the kitchen, her knees nearly buckled. Emma was already there, standing by the counter, humming softly as she chopped carrots. Her pale yellow dress was gone, replaced by a crisp white blouse and dark skirt. Her hair, still slightly damp as if freshly washed, clung to her temples. Emma looked up with a pleasant smile. "Oh, Mom, you're back from your walk. I hope you enjoyed the sun. I bought everything for dinner. We'll have stew tonight." Linda could only stare. Just minutes earlier, she had seen Emma slip into that shadowed house on the edge of the industrial alley, and yet here she was, in the kitchen, as though she had never left. Her hands trembled so violently, she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. The kitchen smelled of onions and herbs, as ordinary as ever, but the world no longer felt safe. The impossible had happened before her eyes. Linda forced a breath, her voice a mere whisper. "Yes, dear. I took a walk." Emma nodded, returning to her chopping as if nothing at all had shifted. But Linda's heart pounded with the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The illusion of perfection had shattered. Now there was no denying it. Two versions of Emma existed, one who disappeared into a crumbling house at number 19 and another who smiled sweetly in the kitchen. And Linda knew, with a cold ache in her bones, that she stood on the edge of a truth far darker than she had ever imagined. Linda did not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the yellow dress disappearing into the crooked doorway of house number 19, only to reopen them and remember Emma's calm figure standing in the kitchen minutes later. The contradiction gnawed at her, whispering questions she could not silence. By dawn, her decision was made. She had to return. The next afternoon, Linda wrapped her shawl tightly and made her way back toward the industrial district. The streets were quieter than usual, the hum of machinery muffled behind warehouse walls. She kept her head down, her steps deliberate, until she reached the narrow alley. The shadows here seemed deeper, as if the sun itself refused to touch the place. There it was again, number 19. The paint still peeled, the door sagged on rusted hinges. Her pulse quickened as she lifted her hand to knock. The sound echoed down the alley, hollow and sharp. For a moment, no one answered. Then the door creaked open. Linda's breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was Emma. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like Emma. The same dark hair, the same soft features, the same nervous tilt of the shoulders. But the eyes were different. They were wide, frightened, almost pleading. "Who are you?" Linda whispered, clutching the frame of the door for balance. The young woman lowered her gaze. "Please, don't be afraid. My name is Isabel." Her voice trembled, softer than Emma's, carrying an accent Linda could not place. Linda's knees weakened. She pressed her back against the wall, needing its support. "How can this be? You look exactly like my daughter-in-law." Isabel stepped aside, motioning for Linda to enter. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and boiled herbs. The small room was dim, its floor cracked, its furniture worn to threads. In one corner, an old man lay coughing on a cot, his skin pale, his breaths shallow. "I know what you are thinking," Isabel said quietly, her hands twisting the rag she carried. "I did not want to deceive you. But Emma, she asked me to help her. She pays me. I pretend to be her when she cannot be at home." Linda's mouth went dry. "Pretend? In my house? With my grandson?" Tears welled in Isabel's eyes. She nodded. "Sometimes she needs me to go to the market for her. Sometimes she asks me to stay with Ethan, to sit in the kitchen, to greet the neighbors. Only for a few hours, never long. I did not want to, but my parents..." Her gaze drifted to the man coughing in the corner. "They are very sick. Medicine is expensive. Emma promised money if I helped." Linda's heart pounded as she tried to grasp the enormity of the confession. Her notebook flashed in her mind, the left hand, the right hand, the sudden mood changes, the neighbor's confusion. The pieces slid together with cruel clarity. "It was you," she whispered. "It was you on those days. You, not Emma." Isabel bowed her head, tears falling freely now. "I am sorry. I never meant harm. I only wanted to keep my parents alive." The room swam before Linda's eyes. Part of her wanted to scream, to hurl accusations, to condemn this girl for stepping into her life, her home. But as she looked again at the threadbare blanket covering the sick man, at the small table with its empty medicine bottles, she felt something else rising in her chest. Pity. "You are not the villain here," Linda said, her voice low, almost breaking. "Emma used you. She put you in this position. But why? Why would she need a double? What is she hiding?" Isabel shook her head. "She never told me. She only said, 'Stay here a while. Do the small things. Do not ask questions.' And I obeyed, Because each time she gave me money, enough for another week of medicine. Linda pressed a trembling hand to her lips. The mystery of two Emmas was no longer a shadow or a suspicion. It stood in front of her in flesh and blood. One woman living in comfort, another in poverty, bound together by a secret arrangement. The truth left Linda dizzy, but also resolute. The lies in her home had been deeper than she imagined. Emma had not only deceived her family, but had dragged another life into the deception. Linda looked into Isabel's tearful eyes, seeing both guilt and desperation. "This cannot continue," she said firmly. "For my son, for Ethan, for you too. We will have to uncover everything." Isabel lowered her face into her hands, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Anderson. Please forgive me." Linda stood frozen, her heart heavy, her mind ablaze. She had found the missing piece of the puzzle, but the picture it revealed was darker than she had ever feared. The secret of house number 19 had been unveiled. The mystery of two Emmas was no longer a question. It was a fact, and it was only the beginning of a truth that could shatter her family forever. Linda could not shake the image of Isabel's tear-streaked face from her mind. The confession explained the double life, the sudden shifts, the handwriting that changed from day to day. Yet there was still a piece missing, something deeper than simple impersonation. Why did Isabel look so perfectly identical to Emma? When Linda returned to the house at number 19 a few days later, she found Isabel waiting. The young woman seemed calmer, though her eyes still carried a trace of shame. Beside her sat an older woman on a worn armchair, her hair silver white, her frame frail but dignified. She looked at Linda with tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. "This is my mother," Isabel said softly. "Mrs. Margaret. She raised me." Linda stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly together. "I need to understand," she said, her voice low. "Please, help me make sense of all this." The older woman's lips curved into a faint, weary smile. "You deserve the truth," she replied. Her voice was thin but steady, touched with the calm authority of someone who had once given instructions in hospital corridors. "I was a nurse many years ago, in a small rural clinic. One night, a young couple came in. The woman had given birth to twins, 2 little girls. They were so poor, their faces lined with desperation. The father told me plainly they could not care for both. They would keep one child, but the other..." She paused, her eyes glistening. "The other, they meant to abandon." Linda's breath caught. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her shawl. "I could not allow it," Margaret continued. "The idea of a newborn left to die broke my heart. I took the second baby into my arms and claimed her as my own. I had no riches to offer, only my love and the promise of survival. That baby was Isabel." The room seemed to spin around Linda. "And the other child?" she asked, though her voice trembled as if she already knew the answer. Margaret's eyes softened with sorrow. "The other child left with her parents. I never saw her again, but I always wondered where she was, what life she lived." Isabel reached for a small envelope tucked into the drawer of a side table. Her hands shook as she pulled out a stack of yellow documents. She placed them gently on the table before Linda. "These are the only papers my mother kept from that night." Linda unfolded the fragile pages with care. They smelled faintly of age and dust. Her eyes moved quickly over the faded ink, admission records, notes from the attending physician, a copy of a birth registration. Then her gaze froze. The date, the time. Her lips parted soundlessly. This is Emma's birthday." The hospital record listed the birth of twin girls, both at dawn on the same day, both in the same village clinic. The names were not written, only Baby A and Baby B. But the dates matched exactly the one Linda remembered from Emma's marriage license, the same day engraved in her memory from birthday celebrations year after year. Her hand trembled so violently she nearly dropped the paper. "They are sisters," she whispered. "Not just sisters, they are twins." The truth hit her with crushing clarity. The reason for their identical faces was no longer a mystery, nor was the strange bond of familiarity Linda had felt with Isabel, despite having only just met her. Emma and Isabel were two halves of a life split apart. One raised in comfort, the other in hardship, their fates colliding in the most twisted way imaginable. Margaret's voice broke into her thoughts, low and full of regret. I could never tell Isabel the full story until now. I wanted to protect her. But when she met Emma and was asked to play her double, I knew the truth could not remain hidden forever. Isabel's tears fell silently onto her lap. So she is my sister, the sister who never came looking for me. Her words cracked with both longing and betrayal. Linda placed the papers down and reached across the table, taking Isabel's cold hand into her own. Yes, child, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She is your twin. And she has wronged you terribly. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the cough of Margaret's ailing husband in the next room. Linda felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath her feet. The mystery of two Emmas had been explained. They were not two strangers, nor tricks of the imagination. They were sisters, bound by blood and torn apart by fate. One had built her life on comfort and deception. The other had been left to suffer in poverty. For Linda, the revelation was both a relief and a burden. The truth had been found, but it was heavier than she had ever expected. Her family was no longer simply troubled by secrets. It was entangled in a tragedy that had begun decades before in a clinic where a choice had doomed one child to be forgotten. She rose from her chair, the documents clutched to her chest. Her voice was steady, though her heart was in pieces. Thank you for telling me. Now I must protect my son and grandson from the lies that threaten to destroy us. And Isabel. She paused, looking into the young woman's broken eyes. You will not be abandoned again. The truth had cracked open like a fragile shell, and now every word spilled into Linda's ears with the weight of inevitability. She sat across from Isabel in the dim room of number 19, the stack of yellowed hospital papers still resting on the table between them. Her heart was raw from the revelation of twinship, but she knew there was more. Something darker lingered behind Emma's scheme. Linda's voice trembled as she asked, "Why would she do this to you? To us? Why ask you to step into her life?" Isabel lowered her eyes, twisting the fabric of her skirt between nervous fingers. At last, she spoke, her voice carrying a mixture of shame and bitterness. She never told me everything, but I saw enough to understand. Emma has a man, a wealthy man. His name is Victor Quinn. A businessman, dressed in suits finer than anything I have ever touched. The first time I heard his name, she was at a cafe with him. I was waiting outside. She thought I could not hear, but through the glass, I saw her smile at him the way a woman does when her heart belongs somewhere else. Linda stiffened, her breath sharp in her throat. Isabel continued, her words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. Emma pays me to take her place so she can slip away. When she needs to attend dinners, travel, or spend long afternoons in hotels, she calls me. She says, "Watch the boy, sit in the kitchen, pretend you are me if anyone comes by." She does not care if I stumble, if I make mistakes. She only cares that her husband and her child do not notice she is gone. The admission hit Linda like a knife. Her mind flashed back to Ethan's words, his confusion between the gentle mother who sang lullabies and the cold one who scolded harshly. It was not simply mood swings. It was two women, one a mother, one an imposter forced into a role. The thought made Linda's stomach turn. She used you, Linda whispered, not only to protect her secret, but to buy herself freedom, freedom to live a life away from her family. Isabel's tears shimmered under the weak light. I agreed at first because I needed the money. My parents' medicines were expensive, and Victor's gifts to her were lavish. She handed me bills as if they were crumbs, nothing to her, everything to me. But every time I saw Ethan look at me, calling me Mom, my heart broke. I am not his mother, yet he clung to me, believing I was. Emma laughed when I told her how confusing it was for him. She said, "Children forget quickly. Do not worry." The cruelty of the words made Linda grip the edge of the table until her knuckles ached. She used her own child as a shield, Linda said bitterly. She abandoned him to your care so she could run into the arms of another man. Yes, Isabel whispered, covering her face with trembling hands. She wanted everything. The stability of a husband at home, the adoration of a son, the admiration of neighbors, but she also wanted the luxury Victor gave her, the champagne, the travel, the silks. She told me once, life is too short to live small. And I realized then she never loved any of it. Not her marriage, not her home, perhaps not even her son. Linda's eyes burned with tears, though her voice hardened. And what of you? Did she not see that you were her sister? That you shared the same blood? Isabel let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. I told her once, half in jest, that we must be related. We look too much alike for it to be chance. She froze for a second, then smiled and said, "You're imagining things. You're just lucky to look like me." She knew, she had to know, but she chose silence. She saw me as nothing more than a tool, not as a sister who deserved the truth. The weight of it all crushed Linda. Emma's betrayal was not confined to a husband she dismissed as useless, nor a child she neglected, nor even the mother-in-law she deceived daily. It was betrayal of her own twin, a girl abandoned to poverty while she claimed a life of comfort. She had taken the blessing of fate and twisted it into a weapon. Linda rose slowly from her chair, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. "This is not only adultery," she said, her voice low, her chest heavy. "This is cruelty, coldness so deep it leaves scars on everyone around her. My son, my grandson, you, all of us." The silence of the room deepened. Even the old man on the cot seemed to pause his coughs, as if the air itself held its breath. For Linda, the final thread of denial snapped. Emma was not the daughter-in-law she once cherished, not the gentle mother she pretended to be. She was a woman who had traded loyalty for luxury, who had deceived her family and silenced her own blood sister. The storm inside Linda was no longer only grief, it was resolve. She looked into Isabel's broken eyes and whispered, "You will not face her lies alone anymore. Together, we will bring the truth into the light." The house felt heavier than ever that evening. Linda moved carefully through the kitchen, her hands steady though her heart rattled like a bird trapped in a cage. She laid out the best china, polished until it gleamed beneath the warm light. A white tablecloth covered the dining table, and candles flickered in their holders, casting soft shadows across the room. The smell of pot roast filled the air, mingling with herbs and garlic, the meal her son David had always loved. But tonight was no celebration. Tonight was judgment. One by one, her family gathered. David returned from work, weary but touched by the effort. He kissed Linda on the cheek. "What's the occasion, Mom?" "Just a family dinner," Linda replied, forcing a smile. "We do not have enough of these." Emma arrived next, dressed in a pale blue dress, her hair smooth, her smile polished. She greeted David with a kiss on the cheek, stroked Ethan's hair, and sat gracefully at the table. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect wife and mother. But Linda saw the cracks in her composure, the flicker of nerves behind her eyes. Then came Mark, stepping in from the cool night air, his pilot's jacket folded neatly over his arm. He carried a folder, and inside it the electronic passport he had promised to bring. Linda's heart thudded at the sight. Finally, Isabel arrived. She wore a simple dress, her face pale, her hands trembling as she stepped through the door. David froze when he saw her, his eyes darting between his wife and this identical figure. Confusion spread across his face. "Mom?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "What is this?" "Please sit," Linda said firmly. The family gathered, the room heavy with silence broken only by the clinking of silverware. Ethan, oblivious to the storm brewing, climbed onto his chair with a cheerful smile. His innocence cut through the tension like sunlight. Halfway through the meal, Ethan set down his fork and looked from Emma to Isabel with wide eyes. "Grandma," he said in his small, clear voice, "why do I have two mommies?" The room froze. David's fork slipped from his hand. Mark glanced sharply at Emma. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. Linda's breath caught in her chest. Emma's face drained of color. She forced a laugh, brittle and unconvincing. "Ethan, darling, you're confused. This woman," she pointed at Isabel, her hand trembling. "She is no one. She is not no one," Mark interrupted, his voice steady and cold. He laid the folder on the table, sliding out the electronic passport. "I saw you, Emma, on my flight to London." "I held your passport in my hand. You cannot be in two places at once." David's eyes darkened as he stared at his wife. "Emma, is this true?" Emma's lips pressed tight, her breath quickening. "That's ridiculous. It's all lies." Before she could continue, another voice came from the doorway. Lucy, Isabel's friend, had entered quietly, her gaze sharp. She stepped forward without hesitation. "It is no lie. I saw you myself, Emma. At the cafe, you were with Victor Quinn. You called him my love. You laughed with him like a woman who belonged to him." The words fell like stones in water, sending ripples of shock across the table. David's face went pale. Ethan blinked, confused, his little hand reaching for his grandmother's arm. Linda gripped it tightly, her chest aching for him. Emma pushed back her chair, her composure shattering. "Enough!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the room. Her face twisted, no longer the polished mask of a perfect wife. "Yes, it is true. I have a lover. Victor gives me a life this family never could. I am tired of this house, tired of living small. David, you are pathetic, always buried in your work. Ethan is nothing but a chain holding me down. And you, Linda." She spat the name like poison. "You think you are the guardian of this family, but you are just a meddling old woman clinging to traditions that mean nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. David sat frozen, his knuckles white against the table. Ethan whimpered, pressing his face into Linda's side. Isabel's tears spilled over, her hand covering her mouth. Emma's chest heaved as she glared at them all. Then, with one final, bitter laugh, she turned on her heel. The door slammed behind her, rattling the windows. The family sat in stunned silence. The candles flickered, casting long shadows across their faces. What had once been a home filled with warmth now felt like the aftermath of a storm. Linda stroked Ethan's hair, her own tears falling silently. She had feared betrayal. She had feared secrets. But nothing had prepared her for Emma's cold confession. The daughter-in-law she had once cherished was gone, replaced by a stranger who had torn the heart out of their family. The night had revealed the truth, and though it had left them shattered, there was no turning back. The weeks that followed were a blur of court papers, consultations, and sleepless nights. David moved through them like a shadow, his once steady shoulders bent under the weight of betrayal. The man who had designed homes for other families now struggled to believe his own could be rebuilt. The divorce proceedings were swift. Emma never contested. She appeared only once in court, her lawyer by her side, her eyes cold and unrepentant. David sat across from her, his hands folded tightly, his jaw clenched. He did not beg or argue. He signed the papers with quiet resolve, as if each stroke of his pen was both an ending and a release. When the judge announced custody of Ethan, Emma made no protest. She simply rose, gathered her bag, and walked away. Her final words to David echoed like glass shattering. "You can keep the boy. Victor and I have no room for that kind of responsibility." Ethan sat in Linda's lap that night, confused and tearful. "Is Mom coming back?" he asked, his small voice breaking. Linda pressed her lips to his hair, fighting back her own sobs. "You are safe here, my love," she whispered. But in her heart, she knew no words could mend the fracture Emma had left behind. The legal threads, however, did not end with the divorce. One afternoon, a knock sounded at the Anderson door. Standing there was a man in a modest suit, a leather briefcase tucked beneath his arm. He introduced himself as Mr. Jensen, a lawyer from the Community Legal Center. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried gravity. "I have been asked to review your case," he said once seated in the living room. "And I must warn you, what Emma did was not only immoral, it may also have been illegal." Linda frowned. "Illegal?" Mr. Jensen nodded. She employed her sister, Isabel, to impersonate her. That arrangement was used to deceive her husband and to neglect the welfare of her child. In the eyes of the law, this could be considered fraud. It could also fall under child endangerment, since Ethan was placed in the care of someone who had no legal guardianship. If she had continued, and if any harm had come to Ethan while Isabel was acting as her, the consequences would have been severe. David buried his face in his hands. So all this time, she was not only lying to us, she was breaking the law. Yes, the lawyer said gently. And your family is not alone. Cases like this are rare, but they serve as a reminder. When trust is broken, the damage spreads. It does not only wound the heart, it shakes the very foundation of what keeps families safe. Linda sat rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. She thought of Ethan, of Isabel, of the night Emma had stood in her kitchen pretending nothing was wrong. The betrayal was no longer a private wound. It was a reflection of something wider, something every community needed to see clearly. How easily appearances can be twisted, how quickly the innocent suffer when deceit takes root. The next day, news spread quietly through their neighborhood. Whispers rose at the bakery, in the church pews, at the farmer's market. Some shook their heads in pity, others in anger. A few whispered Emma's name with contempt, shocked at how a woman so admired could live such a double life. For David, the legal closure did not bring healing. He worked in silence, retreating into long hours at the office, his grief etched in the hollows of his face. For Ethan, the loss was sharp but wordless, expressed in sudden tears at night, in questions that had no gentle answers. And for Linda, the burden was twofold. She carried not only the pain of her family's fracture, but the responsibility to speak the truth aloud so others might not ignore the warning. She wrote in her journal one final time for that chapter, "Deception in a family is not just betrayal of love. It is danger, it is crime. And its victims are often the smallest voices, the children who cannot defend themselves." The candles on her table flickered as she closed the notebook. Her resolve had hardened into something beyond survival. This was no longer only about Emma's betrayal. It was about what needed to be said aloud, to neighbors, to strangers, to the world. Silence protects no one. The Anderson family had been broken, yes, but out of the wreckage, a warning had risen, one that Linda hoped would protect others from ever falling into the same abyss. David had grown thinner in the weeks after the divorce. His eyes, once bright with ideas about bridges and skylines, carried a shadow that never quite lifted. He buried himself in sketches, often staying late at the office until exhaustion forced him home. Linda watched her son drift like a man lost at sea. She knew the wound Emma left was deeper than he admitted. It was not only the betrayal of a wife, it was the crumbling of the dream he had built brick by brick. In the silence that followed Emma's departure, Isabel remained nearby. At first, she kept her visits short, cautious, as if afraid her presence would deepen the family's shame. Yet Ethan, with his innocent trust, was the first to bridge the distance. He would run to her when she arrived, his small hand tugging at her sleeve, urging her to join his games. Linda noticed the way his laughter changed when Isabel was near. It was lighter, freer, as though his heart had found a substitute for the comfort it had lost. One evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Isabel asked Linda if she could speak privately with David. Her voice trembled as she said it. They sat at the kitchen table where so much of the family's history had unfolded. Isabel clasped her hands tightly, her eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table before lifting them to David. "I need to say this," she began softly. "I am sorry. I am sorry for standing in your house, pretending to be someone I was not. I know I hurt you, and I know I frightened Ethan. I told myself I did it for my parents, for their medicine, for our survival. But that does not erase the pain it caused you. Please believe me when I say I never wanted to deceive you. I only wanted to survive." David listened in silence. For a long time he did not speak, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. When he finally raised his eyes, they were tired, but not unkind. "You should have walked away," he said quietly. "But you did not. And yet, I can see you are not her. You are not Emma. "You are different." Tears welled in Isabel's eyes. "Different, but guilty," she whispered. Before David could reply, a small voice carried from the hallway. Ethan stood there in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. He walked toward Isabel, climbed onto her lap, and laid his head on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said in the simple honesty only a child could carry. "You are nice. You take care of me. You are like Mom." The room fell silent. David's breath caught, Linda's hand pressed against her mouth, and Isabel froze, her body trembling under the weight of that single word. Ethan lifted his face, smiling with a purity that pierced through every doubt. "Mom," he said again, with certainty this time. The tears Isabel had been holding back broke free. She hugged him tightly, her voice breaking. "I will never lie to you again," she promised. "I will protect you as if you were my own." That moment was a turning point, as if the walls of betrayal that had imprisoned them finally cracked to let in light. David's eyes glistened, not only with grief, but with something fragile and new: hope. Linda felt her chest swell with relief. Perhaps wounds could never fully vanish, but love had the power to stitch them into something whole again. Over the following weeks, Isabel became more present. She helped Ethan with homework, taught him simple recipes, and walked him to the park, where he laughed without fear. For David, her quiet strength was a balm. They began to talk in the evenings, not of Emma or the past, but of work, of music, of the little joys that made days bearable. Linda watched this new chapter unfold with cautious joy. She knew life could be cruel, but she also knew it could surprise with unexpected gifts. Isabel, once a shadow of deceit, had become a beacon of love. The boy who had been abandoned by one mother was now cherished by another. On a Sunday morning, the family sat together in the garden. Ethan chased butterflies, his laughter echoing under the blue sky. David leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at his lips. Isabel sat beside Linda, her face serene, her hands folded in her lap as though she had finally found her place. It was then Linda whispered to herself, barely audible, "From the darkest betrayal, love has found a way to bloom." The journey had not been simple, and the scars would remain. But in that garden, surrounded by laughter and sunlight, the Anderson family discovered that family is not defined only by blood, but by love that chooses, forgives, and protects. If you believe that true family is built on love rather than blood, share this video with a friend. You never know whose heart might need that reminder today. The roses in Linda's garden had never seemed brighter. Their deep crimson petals swayed gently in the summer breeze, filling the air with a fragrance that carried both memory and renewal. On that morning, the yard was dressed with simple white ribbons and wooden chairs arranged in neat rows. It was not a grand celebration, but that was never the intention. It was meant to be intimate, sincere, a gathering of those who had survived a storm and now sought the calm that followed. Stephen stood at the makeshift altar beneath a wooden arch covered in roses. His suit was modest, yet his expression was transformed. He no longer looked hollowed by betrayal. He looked steady, his eyes anchored by hope. Beside him stood Isabel in a pale dress that caught the sunlight, her face radiant though marked with tears of gratitude. Ethan clutched her hand tightly, as if he feared she might drift away, but she leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered something that made him laugh. The ceremony was simple: no priest, no grand speeches. Only promises spoken aloud, witnessed by a few neighbors, by Mark, who had flown in just to stand by his brother, and by Linda, who had carried them all through the shadows. As Stephen and Isabel exchanged vows, Linda felt a quiet strength fill her chest. This was not the ending she had ever imagined, but perhaps it was the ending they had all needed. When the rings were placed on fingers and the applause rose, Linda's gaze drifted to the roses on the fence. She remembered the night when truth had shattered her home, when Emma's voice had dripped with scorn, when Matthew's innocent eyes had brimmed with confusion. Yet now, in the same home, laughter returned. Betrayal had cut them deeply, but from that wound, something authentic had grown. As the small group shared food and laughter, Linda stepped aside, resting in her chair beneath the shade. Her thoughts flowed quietly, a stream of memory and reflection. She thought of Emma's cold words, of Isabel's trembling confession, of Ethan's desperate wish for the gentle mother to return. Then she thought of what had unfolded since, the healing, the tenderness, the courage of a family that had chosen not to drown in silence. Her voice, though soft, carried into the air like a prayer. So many mothers live in silence. So many sit in their kitchens, staring at doubts they are too afraid to name. They tell themselves it is safer not to know, easier not to ask. But I have learned that truth, no matter how much it hurts, can set us free. It may burn away the illusions we cling to, but it also clears the way for love that is real. Ethan came running toward her then, his little suit slightly wrinkled, his cheeks flushed. He climbed into her lap and pointed at Isabel across the garden. "Grandma, look, I have 2 moms now, one left, but this one stays. She sings to me. She listens." Linda kissed his forehead, her eyes misty. "Yes, my darling, she stays." The roses swayed again, and Linda knew this moment was not just for her family. It was for every person listening, every soul out there carrying quiet suspicion or hidden pain. She wanted them to hear her heart. She wanted them to know they were not alone. "Perhaps you are listening to my story and recognizing your own life," she continued, her tone intimate, as if speaking directly to the unseen faces beyond the garden. "Perhaps you have doubts. Perhaps you have questions you are too afraid to ask. I tell you this, truth may not always bring comfort at first, but it will always bring freedom. Do not be afraid to step into the darkness. Only there will you find what has been hidden from you." As the afternoon faded into golden light, Linda raised her eyes and offered her final reflection. "If you were in my place, what would you choose? Would you keep the silence to protect the illusion of peace, or would you walk into the shadows to discover the truth? Think carefully, for every choice shapes not just your life, but the lives of those you love." The roses shimmered in the last light of day, their fragrance mingling with laughter that promised tomorrow. The story was not over. It had only turned a page. As the roses in Linda's garden closed their petals with the coming night, I could not help but think that this story, though rooted in betrayal and pain, was also about rebirth. What happened to Linda, Stephen, Ethan, and Isabel is not only a tale of one family, it is a mirror held up to so many lives, a reminder that truth, though heavy, can open the door to healing. Every one of us carries untold chapters. Some are filled with joy, others with secrets we are afraid to face. Perhaps you too have lived through a moment when silence felt safer than questions, when turning away seemed easier than opening your eyes to what was really happening. Yet it is in those very moments that courage matters most. Linda chose to step into the shadows, and in doing so, she discovered not only a painful truth, but also the possibility of love that was genuine and lasting. I invite you now to pause and reflect. What is the story that your heart has been carrying? What truth do you long to tell, not to the world perhaps, but to yourself? Stories are more than words. They are bridges that connect us, lamps that light the way for others who walk in darkness. By sharing your voice, you may give someone else the courage to rise. If this story touched you, I gently ask that you support this community. Press the like button so others can discover it. Share it with a friend or loved one who might need hope. And most of all, subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter. By doing so, you will not miss the stories to come, stories of resilience, of hidden strength, of lives that show us aging is not the end, but the flowering of wisdom. This channel exists to honor voices often forgotten, to remind us that every ending holds the seed of a new beginning. Thank you for walking this path with us today. And now, I ask you, if you had been in Linda's place, would you have stayed silent, or would you have stepped forward into the truth?